Today is Wednesday, February 3rd, 2016. We have several bills that we are going to be hearing. And at this time, I would like to ask the clerk to please take the roll. Here.
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 Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, at this time, the committee, we're going to make a motion and take a vote. What we are going to vote on is called holding the bills for further study in the committee. What this does, it enables for those pieces of legislation to stay alive in the committee as we make amendments, work on them, and review that legislation. During the hearings, the sponsors will get a chance to speak, and the opponents of the bill will be given as much time as necessary, both pro, as much time as necessary, and con, and we would ask other individuals to kindly try to limit their testimony to 2 minutes. And I would suggest, if you have written testimony, it is always better to hand the testimony in and speak extemporaneously about the bill from your heart, and that way you get 2 bites at the apple. And if we were to grade you, you would get extra credit for both handing in a written documentation of your side and an oral presentation, and that would be my recommendation. So at this time, I'm going to make a motion to hold the following bills for further study. House Bill 7014, 7363, 7259, 7155. I'll make that motion. Second by Representative Azzanaro. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. 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 Thank you. And Representative Handy and Representative Maldonado present and in the affirmative on those 2 bills. And Representative Canario as well, same request, without objection. The first bill that we're going to hear is by Representative Jacquard, 7363, an act relating to insurance, hearing aids. Representative Jacquard, welcome. And Representative Jacquard, would you like anyone else to come up to the table with you?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm going to relinquish the table in a minute to Steve Florio and his assistant Tim from the Rhode Island Commission on the Deaf and Hard of Hearing. Just like to briefly explain the bill. I sponsored it on their behalf. It was based on some research that Steve Florio has conducted on the requirements under the Affordable Care Act for hearing aid coverage. That research is still ongoing, as Steve will tell you. This is only basically some preliminary legislation that removes the caps on hearing aid coverage that insurance companies provide for our citizens. So I'd ask that Steve be allowed to come up here and testify on the bills. I'll certainly remain here for any questions.
Could Mr. Steve Florio please come up to the table? Welcome. Mr. Florio, the button should be up.
It's up. Good
Thank
evening.
you. Please proceed and welcome.
Thank you. I greet all of you this evening. My name is Stephen Florio. I'm the director of the Commission on the Deaf and Hard of Hearing, and I want to thank Mr. Jacquard for sponsoring this bill. The bottom line is I'm in a position to support the deaf and hard of hearing community in terms of their medical need for hearing aids. We have a large percentage of individuals who end up being financially responsible for hearing aids. It's very expensive, and it has a lot to do with their productivity their employment, and their ability to be part of society and the community at large. So historically, the Office of Health Insurance Commissioners have opposed this bill because of the cap and the quantity, the numbers in general. We came up with a notion of changing that. We weren't quite sure. We've done quite a bit of research and collected a lot of information, and that's why the language in this most current bill has changed. I've talked to hearing aid dealers and audiologists. For the most part, I'm getting a positive reaction. Many people are eager to come up with a solution. So we do need more time to research the bill. And after that research is put together, we may come up with an amendment, and then it'll be ready to go.
Thank you very much. And is it Mr. Andriozzi? Oh, no, excuse me. Thought he was.
Tim Riker.
Oh, hi, Tim. Welcome. Please proceed.
Hi there. My name is Tim Riker. I'm the chairman of the Rhode Island Commission on the Deaf and Hard of Hearing, Commissioners. I teach American Sign Language at Brown University. And the reason I'm here as a commissioner is that we have 11 individuals on the commission, and typically we vote on appropriate legislation. We vote cooperatively. And everyone voted on this bill. We wanted to increase the number of people who are able to get and benefit from hearing aids. They're not affordable. And it's an important part of everyday life. It's like walking or eating or sleeping. Being able to hear, be involved with people is required for so many people, for their livelihood and for their happiness. So without that, they wouldn't be able to participate in the workplace or in sporting teams or everyday life. It's very limited without a quality hearing aid. And I know that there are different points of view and various concerns on that. That's typical and normal. What I'd like to see when this bill does pass is a way to meet the needs of the most people. I want it to be successful and I want it to be affordable. So I look forward to the process.
Are there any questions for these witnesses? Steve and Tim, thank you for your testimony. And Representative Jacquard, thank you. Richard Beretta as representing Health Span and is opposed to this. And Terry Martesian. And Sean Donahue from Blue Cross is also in opposition and not speaking. Welcome, Mr. Martesian. Please proceed.
Welcome, Chairman, members of the committee. Terry Martesian, representing America's health insurance plans. As you probably know by now, the insurance industry has made vast efforts to meet the needs of the hearing impaired and deaf, and we will continue to do so. However, we are opposed to H 7363 because this would dramatically expand an already existing coverage, and I know the ACA would probably allow that. The problem is that right now, Rhode Island is one of only 18 states that even provide coverage, and we're one of only 3 states that provide coverage for adults, and we are the most generous already. And this is just going to compound the cost to not only the individuals, but also to our small group, small businesses. Why? Because under ERISA, any self-insured company, the larger companies, they're exempt from all the mandates that you've passed. They can voluntarily cover, but they're not mandated. You cannot mandate them to cover. Also, for your information, Medicare, and I'm a senior citizen, you would think if anybody would provide coverage, health insurance coverage, doesn't provide coverage for hearing aids. I didn't know that, but it's true from what I'm told. One of our concerns is that there's nothing in this legislation right now that would preclude the manufacturers from increasing their costs for their products and services. And a matter of fact, if I recall, one of the lines would require us to provide coverage for the warranties, the cost of repairs and warranties. So, this is we're concerned about this, and we're concerned about the fact that there's nothing to preclude the manufacturers. And obviously, if they know there's insurance, you can be certain that there's going to be probably an increase in the cost, because there's nothing prohibiting them from increasing the cost. And that's a concern, because it's going to fall on us, the insurers, and ultimately on our subscribers. And for those reasons, we would ask that we've been willing to sit down with the proponents. We always have. We have a pretty good relationship. I have a very good relationship with Steve over the years. But we think that this bill here is going to add to the cost of our members, and we're very much concerned about that, because they're concerned about costs. The other thing, if you're going to pass it, it has effective date of July 1, 2016. Well, filings have already been made for this year for all the plans. So any increase would not be incorporated in the present rates and present premiums. So that's another issue. But again, we're willing to sit down and talk with the proponents of this. But this bill needs a little bit of work, if anything.
Thank you, Mr. Martesian. Are there any questions for Mr. Martesian? And I believe Mr. Florio said he is willing to work with you and realizes there's work to do, so we appreciate that offer.
In the past.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. We have Lori Duffy, the Rhode Island Academy of Audiology, is opposed to this, not speaking. Pamela King, ATEL program, is also opposed and not speaking. Everyone else is in favor. Oh, Michael Andriozzi, International Heritage. Mr. Andriozzi?
Hearing Society.
Hearing Society? Yes, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm Michael Andriozzi. I'm actually the governor of the Northeast of the International Hearing Aid Society. I'm also the CEO of Beltone Hearing Aids, which is based here in Rhode Island, and do business in 9 states on fitting hearing aids to the hearing impaired. We were part of originally having this bill passed many years ago with the International Hearing Aid Society involved, which was, I would say, way ahead of the curve of what went on across the country. I'm a hearing aid user myself, wear hearing aids, so I understand what the benefit of hearing aids do for patients, and we fit thousands of them a year to patients across the country. The bill was recently exposed to us, so we just recently got our arms around it. Tonight was the first night I met Mr. Florio and had a conversation with him. I think that the bill has some legs to it, but needs to be modified, and I think that's what you suggested.
Yes, they're willing to work with you.
Correct. So I think that one of the things we'd like to be able to do is help with the language in the bill. The fact that the insurance coverages that are in place today barely cover the costs of a basic hearing instrument. I think that the goal of what we'd like to do is perhaps adjust the language and the coverage so that it covers at least a basic hearing instrument for someone who needs it, which would satisfy the majority of the public, which would be a great head start. So that would be our stance on this.
Well, that would be great if you could work with Mr. Florio and come up with some additional language where this would be acceptable to you, Mr. Andriozzi, and your association.
Thank you.
Are there any questions? Yes, Representative Fogarty.
So I'm looking at the Blue Cross letter from Sean Donahue, and it says here that the legislation does nothing to preclude hearing aid manufacturers from increasing the prices of their products and services. So I'm not saying that you're manufacturing. You probably have manufacturers. So what's your thoughts on that?
So the manufacturers, there's 6 major manufacturers of hearing aids in the world today. Mm-hmm. So they control the hearing aids that are produced. We are the audiologists of the retail side of it.
Right.
The price of hearing aids hasn't dramatically increased on the wholesale side. In fact, some of the higher end technology has, but the basic products have pretty much stayed intact with that. So I would argue with the fact that the prices have increased. I would say they would about stay the same.
But I think their thought is that if you do increase the insurance or the payment of it, that it will increase. Is that what you would?
Well, if they increase the insurance coverage,
right,
then the insurance companies such as Blue Cross would obviously have to pay more towards the benefit to the end patient. And that's really what this is all about. The actual cost of the product, I think, has nothing to do with it whatsoever.
You don't think so? All right.
Thank you. Any further questions for Mr. Andriozzi? Mr. Andriozzi, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Michael D. Evora, Rhode Island Commission on Human Rights, Kathleen C. Hittner, and Denise Carson signed up in support of this and is not speaking. Is Michael D. Evora here? No. Kathleen C. Hittner. Oh, I sent an email of support. Supports this with an amendment. Courtney Petrarca is signed up in support of this and not speaking. And Steve DeToy, Rhode Island Medical Society, has a question for the bill and is not speaking. Is there anyone else on this bill that I haven't called or inadvertently missed? Thank you. That concludes the hearing on House Bill 7363. The next bill that we're going to hear is House Bill 7014 by Representative Norton. Representative Norton, welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, Chairman and committee members. HEW stands for Adaptive Telephone Equipment Loans, and it is operated in Rhode Island out of the Office of Rehabilitation Services. And this is a partnership with the federal government and also manufacturers of devices that are very useful to deaf and hard of hearing and those with neuromuscular issues. This provides an addition to our loan portfolio so that wireless, which is something that we all like to use these days, will be available for loans.
And Representative Norton, welcome. And did we pass this last year?
Overwhelming in the House.
Almost unanimously in the House?
Yes, it got lost in the end of the year.
And just to refresh the memory of the members on the committee, there is no fiscal note on this because
hard to believe, but there isn't. The program is designed to enable our needy. It goes through the process of qualified eligibility. And as you know, with climate change and serious weather issues, as well as medical emergencies, having these devices readily available and adding wireless to the loan portfolio is really essential.
So it's welcome to the 21st century.
Yes.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Representative Norton? Thank you very much, Representative Norton.
Thank you.
Courtney Petrarca signed up, and she is supporting this. There is no opposition. Denise Corson, ATEL program. Could you come forward, please? And Lori Duffy, Rhode Island audiologist, signed up in support of this, is not speaking. Pamela King, ATEL program, is also supporting this, not speaking. And Timothy Riker, could you come forward as well as Bob Marshall? Welcome, Denise. Please proceed.
Good afternoon. Good evening. I am the program coordinator of the Adaptive Telephone Equipment Loan Program. I have been the program coordinator for the last 10 years. And within those 10 years, there has been a lot of changes. The way people have communicated has changed greatly. Currently, about 91% of Americans have cell phones, and only 25% of Americans have no landline at all now. So as the times are changing, we want to be able to still satisfy the customers that we assist. We assist 3 different types of disabilities: hearing, speech, and muscular disabilities. And they are of low income. So a lot of these things are not available to them because of not being able to pass putting security deposits down or background checks. There's a lot of obstacles for them. With cell phones and wireless technology and the ability of apps to be able to do all sorts of things that we take for granted. And just to give you a couple examples, deaf individuals can sign using a smartphone. Hard of hearing individuals can read captions on a smartphone. Speech disabled individuals can use speech generating apps. Paralyzed individuals can use their voice to generate the phone to do things for them. And also in the state of emergency, things can be sent to them via the smartphone. So it really is something that we really need to make available. And it's not just making these phones available, it's actually giving them training and knowing that these things exist so that they can communicate with the rest of the world and not be just in their home being able to communicate.
Thank you very much, Ms. Corson. Are there any questions for this witness? Thank you.
Thank you.
And Mr. Riker, welcome.
Good evening. Again, my name is Tim Riker, Chairman of the Rhode Island Commission on the Deaf and Hard of Hearing, and teacher of ASL at Brown University. And I would like to explain a little bit about the technology. In the past 10 years, it's changed enormously, as Denise was just saying. I'd like to even add to this that it's not trivial. This is essential for deaf people. Technology changes, and as a result of that, our society changes, and the ability to provide access to deaf people has changed. It used to be with public telephones, we would need a teletypewriter, and now they're no longer necessary. They've been removed. If you go to the airport, the way you might contact your family member to pick you up or get information is that you get to the airport. There's no communication access whatsoever. You need your device. At Brown University, if there's any kind of an emergency, I get a text now, and that way I know what's going on. If, I don't know, I need a late night taxi, I have my phone, which is a real lifesaver. It's what I use to have complete access. As a commissioner, and all of the commissioners have discussed this bill, we heartily agree that this is important. So we'd love to see this bill pass. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Riker. Are there any questions for Mr. Riker? Thank you, Mr. Riker. Mr. Marshall, please proceed.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear on behalf of the Rhode Island Developmental Disabilities Council. We supported this bill last year. We're very happy to see you pass it. Very disappointed when it got lost at the end of the session. As we said last year, this is something that really needs to be updated. It's similar to if you were looking at trying to help out business and they said they needed high-speed internet and you say, well, we'll give you a telex. Giving people very old technology instead of what they need, and it's really keeping them from being able to fully accomplish what they need to do. So we're very supportive of this bill, and we know that you are also.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall. Are there any questions for Mr. Marshall? Thank you. This concludes the hearing on 7014. The next bill that we're going to hear is by Representative Sakachi, 7259. An act relating to state affairs of government, police officers. This would require the Commission on Standards and Training to train and instruct police officers and trainees to identify complaints involving mental health and substance abuse emergencies, to develop law enforcement responses for such agencies. Welcome, Representative Sakachi, my colleague from Warwick. Always a pleasure. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have the pleasure. It's the first time I'm testifying at HEW in 3 years, so I'm happy to be here before this esteemed committee. And
it's your lucky night.
It is. I'd like to read a brief statement. I know there's many witnesses who've testified in favor, who were really what I would call experts on the bill. So I'd like to read my statement and then take any questions if the committee has any. If someone cuts themselves, we know to clean the wound and put on a bandage. If someone falls and twists their ankle, we know how to get ice. If someone is having a heart attack, most know to call for help and administer an aspirin. Unfortunately, mental health issues aren't as easy. A 2003 study estimates that between 7 and 10% of all law enforcement service calls involved a person with mental illness. That number has probably only increased today. Police officers are now the first in line for many people suffering with mental illness. This challenges agencies in 4 critical areas. 1, a policeman's safety, the officer who is responding to the call, his personal safety. 2, access to mental health treatment and support and services. frequency of these individual encounters with the criminal justice system, and certain costs incurred by law enforcement agencies. Let me make one thing clear. The cost for this program is minimal. The cost of this 8-hour class and the certification for the book is less than $50 per individual. I can tell you as an attorney, a cost of a lawsuit is substantially more. It has devastating fiscal impacts on a community, on a police officer, to defend it, not to mention the toll on the individual who was involved. And of course, ultimately, the taxpayers of the municipalities. Since May of 2008, local law enforcement has been partnering with Gateway Healthcare and mental health training for police officers. It's called Mental Health First Aid. What is mental health first aid and what it does? Mental health first aid is an 8-hour evidence-based training program designated to educate individuals on how to help those in developing experience in a mental health crisis. Equivalent to general first aid and an approach, mental health first aid is given until appropriate treatment and support is received or until the crisis is resolved. It is proven to increase knowledge, reduce stigma, and most importantly, increase support of actions. It even improves mental health of first aiders. It does not teach people, in this case police officers, to be therapists. Rather, it teaches how to recognize the signs of symptoms of mental health disorders such as anxiety, depression, psychosis, addiction. How to approach someone in a mental health crisis situation. How to be supportive, diffuse the situation, and encourage professional help. And what to do if someone is suicidal or is harming themselves or others, and if they refuse help. Making sure Rhode Island first responders have the right training, practice, and preparation to de-escalate a crisis situation safely and effectively is one of the most essential things that we can do to keep every Rhode Islander safe. That's the intent of this bill. It would mandate certified training at the police academy for police officers by a specialist. The certification is something that dramatically helps if there was ever a potential lawsuit, but more importantly, it helps diffuse the situation, protects the police officer and the individual who's in mental health distress. I'd be happy to take any questions if there are any. I know there's a long list of
Yes,
people
we
behind
have a
me.
long list, Representative Sakachi. In your professional capacity as an attorney, do you think there's a lack of mental health literacy among the law enforcement? Do you see it in your practice?
I don't. The intent is not in any way to say that the policemen are lacking. We do a good job. I think we could do a better job, and I commend them for their courage and working every day. They are encountering these situations. As you know, in the mental health field, everybody wants to deinstitutionalize, and there's strong benefits for that. But we are, as a society, as a government, putting people in group home settings, returning them to the public, hoping that they take their medication, hoping that there are safety. Unfortunately, the situations are on the rise where altercations exist, where somebody has a mental health episode, the police are called, and there's a problem. So yes, I do think we could do better. I do think we need more training and for our first responders to protect them as much as the individual.
Thank you, Representative Sakachi. Are there any questions for Representative Sakachi? Thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you.
Next, we have Major William Jameson, who is, opposed to this, and we have some written testimony from Major O'Donnell, Colonel O'Donnell, and let's see, all the rest are opposed. So Blair Lynch, DHS, signed up in support of this and is not speaking. Stephen Brown, ACLU, a key proponent, is supporting this and not speaking. Mr. Robert Marshall, if you could come forward, please. with Mr. Richard, is it Leclerc? Correct? Please come forward. Mr. Marshall, please proceed. Welcome.
Hi, thank you again for the opportunity to speak with you tonight. Be very brief. We've been supporting a similar bill for DD training for similar reasons. Our only concern is that, what we'd like to see is one bill that addresses the DD and the mental health issues. And as well, I remember when we were here last year, Steve Florio brought up that some compelling cases of issues that people misunderstanding his population also. There are good trainings out there that are coming on board. We did just find last week a state down south that has passed a bill for DD training that's like 4 hours and doesn't cost much money. I haven't got any details on it yet. I sent for them. But I think that what we need to do is do one bill that does all three so that we don't get them competing. And, we've got some voluntary stuff going on now with mental health in some communities. We got some voluntary stuff going on with DD in some communities. If we mandate one or the other, you know what's going to happen. The hours are going to drop out from the one that's not mandated. So I'm happy to work with the sponsor on trying to put together a bill that addresses all three and see if we can move.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall. Are there any questions for Mr. Marshall? Thank you very much. Mr. Leclerc, please proceed. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Rich Leclerc. I'm the president of Gateway Healthcare. We're a nonprofit organization that's affiliated with Lifespan. We're a community-based mental health center providing mental health, substance use, and addiction treatment to about 15,000 people a year, about 3,000 adults with severe mental illness, about 3 children with severe emotional disorders, and we're involved in about 9,000 crisis intervention emergency responses. Despite that, we believe that law enforcement deals more with mental health issues than we do. And we want to make sure by supporting this bill, the 7259, and I'd also like to thank Representative Shikarchi for introducing it and other sponsors of the bill, that it would give the baseline education and training to all law enforcement officers in Rhode Island and prepare them to be able to not only detect the signs and symptoms of major mental illness, but also to be able to diffuse a crisis and to be able to interact and get individuals to the best appropriate treatment. The training is local. It was brought to, it's sponsored by the National Council for Behavioral Health Care, and Gateway Healthcare in 2008 was one of the first sponsors of that in Rhode Island. There are currently 500,000 trained in mental health first aid around the country, about 2,000 in Rhode Island, and we've done most of those trainings. But the ability to have the local training, we can then teach law enforcement about the local resources and approaches to getting someone into care, in addition to diffusing a potentially violent and dangerous situation. There were about 30 bills introduced in 21 states a few years ago. 17 passed, all dealing with either mandating treatment for certain categories like teachers and law enforcement, or providing funding for certain municipalities for this particular training. Lastly, I'd like to conclude that when we first provided the training, in the early years, there was a newspaper article in the Providence Journal about Lieutenant Dan Gannon in Providence, who had taken the mental health first aid training and was called to the scene of a youth wielding a knife with duct tape all over him, in shorts, clearly individual psychotic and in distress. There were tasers and guns available. Law enforcement, SWAT teams were there, and he was able to, because of his training, and I'll have a quote in a minute, diffuse the situation, get the person into treatment, and he had promised this individual, because it was a hot summer day, that he would get him a Dell's Lemonade, and showed up the day after with the Dell's Lemonade and followed through with that. So something that could have turned pretty ugly was saved by Lieutenant Gannon's actions, and it says, quote, "is a combination of experience, mental health training, and taking some time to let things calm down. There are a lot of people like him who normally get arrested, who should not be. It serves no purpose." So I'd be glad to entertain it.
Excellent. Nothing like a cold Dell's Lemonade to resolve an issue. Are there any questions for Mr. Leclerc? Yes, Representative Handy.
Thank you. I appreciate what you were saying there, because I was thinking about and also thinking about what Representative Shikarchi was saying about the cost, that obviously the non-altruistic side of it. But again, I think what you were pointing to. But do you know, are there some trainings though that mix together? Again, DD, because to me actually there might potentially be a lot of overlap in some cases. Obviously, there are folks sometimes that have mental health issues and some of the other corresponding things. But I did wonder, the training you're describing is just on mental health. Is going to be dealing, I imagine, heavily with psychotic issue type of things, maybe Alzheimer's folks, something like that kind of a situation. But do you think it would be relatively easy? That's maybe an unfair term. Does it make sense to you that we potentially could merge those two things together, though?
Well, anything is possible. Right now, this is an evidence-based practice recognized by the federal government that you get certified in afterwards. So and there's some changes to it happening all the time. Refresher courses are going to be planned to have online courses afterwards. Right now, it's an 8-hour experiential course. So there may be changes in time, but we wouldn't want to change too much the model in order to maintain that certification standard.
And to follow, you said it's 8 hours, but there are some evidence. There's some. Are there some kind of correlated effects and things like that where they've looked at departments that have used this and sort of seen changes in the? Have they got some numbers, some results from those things?
There are some studies that are being done on it, but like all educational programs, it's always hard to know the effect, how long it lasts. And I mean, if we could find that out, I think all colleges in the United States would latch onto that particular instrument.
Sure.
So there is some evidence about the effectiveness of it, but it is an evidence-based practice recognized by the federal government.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? Thank you very much for your testimony. Cheryl Watson, Randall Rose, and Joe Coffey, the Warwick PD, and also Tony Capazza has signed up representing the International Brotherhood of Police Officers in support of this legislation. And we'll start with Officer Coffey. Welcome.
Welcome, Mr. Chairman. And I want you to know the city is safe following that incident at the Vets High School today.
Oh, great.
You did a
great.
magnificent job. And all
it's
the kids
a
are
difficult
safe.
time for teachers, schools, administrators, and police departments. So we thank you and Colonel McCartney for keeping our city safe. Please proceed and welcome.
Again, I'm Captain Joe Coffey of the Warwick Police Department, 30-year veteran of public safety. I'm the department's mental health CRT team leader and mental health liaison. I have a lot of experience in the state with teaching mental health, first aid, as well as nationally. I have taught to Albuquerque Police, Philadelphia Police, Washington, D.C., and the list goes on. This course, in addition to being validated, it's being used by some pretty big cities who recognize some, unfortunately, after litigation, that they needed some type of training. Personally, I've been exposed to persons experiencing mental health problems my entire life. My neighbors, my friends, my own mother, veterans, the officers that we're talking about going to these numerous calls, and they number about 15% of our calls. When you include developmental disabilities, when you include hard of hearing calls to special populations, we're talking about 20% of our calls. We need to provide these officers with the appropriate skills, abilities, and confidence to respond to these calls appropriately, safely, with good outcomes, and connect them to treatment. We're talking about veterans. We're talking about kids being bullied on the internet, dealing with depression. We're talking about teachers, police officers who are dealing with wellness and mental health issues. This goes far beyond what some public view may be of who deals with mental health issues. The police are exposed and responding to every neighborhood in the city of Warwick, and I assure you that there's a good chance those sirens that went by may be responding to a call in crisis. We provide training for police officers in firearms, mandatory training in domestic violence, hate crimes, and numerous other important topics. I can tell you with assurance that mental health response takes probably all those calls combined, and that's the amount we're dealing with. Officers are begging for a consistent, reliable, validated training, just like we would in the other specialized skills that they're receiving. So I know I speak on behalf of the Warwick Police, an endorsement from the Police Association, Police Chiefs Association, and the standards on police training, as mentioned through the Colonel. We're in desperate need to have a consistent program.
Thank you, Captain. Are there any questions? Thank you very much for your testimony. Ms. Watson, please proceed and welcome. The button should be up.
Thank you very much, and I can't express my appreciation enough to what's up? Okay, sorry.
Pull it closer, maybe. Thanks. Beautiful.
Better?
Thank you.
Better? To support this bill. Police officers have been trained in mental health first aid for several years through the partnership with Gateway. I'm the manager of emergency and outpatient services. I also oversee our mental health training, and I'm a certified mental health first aid instructor. And together we've worked with trained instructors, Captain Coffey included, to bring mental health first aid to current recruits at the academy. We're really looking to codify this at this point, to solidify and to know going forward that there is a consistent and reliable response that can be expected throughout the state. A piece that others don't often talk about is the stigmatization that's associated with mental illness. In this country, only 41% in any given year of people with mental health needs actually get treatment. So we're looking at darn close to 60% of folks who don't get the treatment and the help that they need. One of the reasons for that we know is the stigmatization that's associated. If we have a neighbor, a colleague, a friend, a family member who's experiencing a major physical health emergency or a physical health crisis of some kind, we rally around them. We bake casseroles, we send cards, we watch their kids. We do everything that we can to let them know that we're in their corner. Conversely, when that same neighbor or even family member or colleague is experiencing a major mental health crisis, we often don't know what to say. We say nothing at all. We go silent. I'd like to literally leave you with a takeaway today. I've brought with me a set of the most common and prevalent myths around mental illness. And I think as we bring this to the recruits...
Oh, do you have them in writing?
I do.
Oh, beautiful. Oh, great. Thank you.
As we bring these to the recruits, we greatly increase the likelihood that these folks who are not accessing services are going to be appropriately identified, and the likelihood that they're going to get the treatment that they need is just greatly enhanced. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Watson. Any questions for Ms. Watson? Thank you very much for your testimony. And Randall Rose, do you have anything to add that has not already been said? Mr. Rose, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I will try not to overlap with what anybody else has said. We have been hearing a lot about problems with police interaction with people who are suffering from mental illness, but it's true that police officers face a lot of different challenges. They have to deal with some of the most difficult situations out there, and there's a wide variety. And because there's a wide variety of situations that police officers need to deal with, they also need a correspondingly high number of the correspondingly large amount of training to deal with these different kinds of situations. It can't be a one-size-fits-all thing. Some of the situations that officers have to deal with are very different from others, and this is a good case in point that we have right here. We have to make sure that the officers have enough training to deal with this. Unfortunately, the situation is getting better. I'm always glad when I can say that things are getting better, but there has been a lot of progress in realizing that the way police officers can stay safe and protect the public in the case of criminals is not necessarily the same as the way the best approach to staying safe and protecting the public in the case of people with mental illness, and a number of states are passing laws on this, and I hope that Rhode Island will be a leader in this as well. So it's good It's good that we have this bill. I testified in the previous bill on the same subject, but I think this one is better. And one thing I especially like about it is that it includes includes training not just for recruits, but also in-service training for officers already on the force, because often there's more techniques that have been developed that officers should know about. So I hope this is going to lead. I hope this bill does get passed. I think it will lead to fewer people unnecessarily getting into violent confrontations with police, fewer people unnecessarily being put into jail, and people getting treatment they need, and not some of the tragedies we've seen from elsewhere in the country. So I'm glad to support this bill. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And nice and concise tonight, Mr. Rose. One of your better testifying moments. Right on target. Thank you very much. Is there any question for Mr. Rose tonight? Very concise and right spot on your points. That concludes the hearing on House Bill 7259. Thank you very much for your testimony, everyone. The next bill that we're going to hear is House Bill 7155 by Representative Natalillo, an act relating to motor and other vehicles, equipment, and accessories. This bill would require that all new school buses purchased or leased for use in the state be equipped with seatbelt assemblies for each passenger and operator seat. Representative Natalillo from Coventry, do you have anything beyond Coventry? Or
Coventry.
Just Coventry, nothing but Coventry.
Coventry, nothing but Coventry.
Yes.
I'm a lucky man.
Yes.
Thank
God's
you, Mr.
country.
Chairman.
Welcome.
Members
please.
of the committee. With your patience, just for a moment, and your permission.
Take your time.
I have a packet. Could the clerk please pass that out? In presentation of my legislation last year, several questions came up. And what I did was I reached out to the experts in terms of fact to fiction is really what it comes to be. Safeguard has done their due diligence in researching fact is myth in comparison to the actual facts of the possibility of putting seatbelts into school buses and the concerns. So within this package, I'll testify. As you all know, I'm impassioned by this bill because, to me, it makes sense. It's common sense legislation. We're in a state now where click it or ticket is for passenger vehicles. Why not our school buses? That's the only means of transportation at this point in time that are not required, and they're carrying our precious cargo. I brought this up last time. We drive our children in our vehicles to the bus stop. Before the car moves from the driveway, we express to them the car will not move from the driveway unless the seat belts are on. We drive them to the bus stop. We let them off. We put them on the school bus, and there is no continuation of that safety on the school bus. The question is, why? Why are there not seatbelts on school buses? The answer to this is the word compartmentalization, which is the bus design. Years ago, when the bus was designed, it was designed to absorb impact. The problem is that the impact studies did not do this from an all-around impact outlook from all angles of the bus. The new impact studies have done this. They have done it from the front, the rear, the side, and the rollover. The side and the rollover was the greatest concern because when we look at the actual accidents that are happening, that are severe, they are from the side or a rollover. And those are the ones that result in death or serious injury. Questions were brought up in regards to, well, we need to look and see statistically how many deaths have occurred because of a result of not having seatbelts. What wasn't looked at is that seatbelts are required for us in vehicles to prevent injury and prevent death. So we needed to look at school buses and injuries, not just deaths that occurred, which are tragedy, but there, statistically, in your packet, you'll see there's over 17,000 injuries that have happened on school buses. And these are minor injuries, but there's still injuries that are occurring because there are no seatbelts on the school buses. So in presenting my legislation last year, I reached out to individuals, mostly parents, because fiscally this will, and we'll discuss this towards the end of the legislation, there is a cost to this. And when I spoke to the parents, I said to them, how do you feel about knowing your child is on the school bus and there is no continuation in transportation of the safety going to school? Are you concerned with that? Absolutely. I said, well, you know, there is a cost to it, to putting seatbelts in school buses. They've never been there before. And they said, well, you can't put a cost on my child's life. And I feel very strongly about that. And so I looked into it, and we had further discussions with a couple of bus drivers, because I think it's important, the individuals who are driving the children on the bus. I had informal conversations with them, and I said to them, if I decided that I wanted to submit legislation again in putting seatbelts on school buses, you transport these children to school. I said, there has to be an abundance of ruckus, children going from chair to chair. Would it make your life easier knowing that they were buckled in? Well, it would limit the amount of commotion. And I said, your responsibility is to drive, it's not to discipline. Your focus is approximately 70 passengers, is to getting them to their destination in the morning and then back to their residence. I said, would this make your life easier? Well, I talked to 3 bus drivers, and they nodded yes. There were concerns that were brought up, and you'll see within the packet, about if there was a fire on the bus. And immediately, me not being an expert in fire, I said, well, I'll reach out to the experts and see what they have to say. But the first thing that came to mind is that I want to look at transportation for children in a whole new way for Rhode Island with seatbelts, which means I want to consider doing what we do in schools for a fire drill. How do we safely evacuate 300 to 400 children from a school in a calm manner? We have fire drills. So in considering putting seatbelts on school buses, I think that the school district should come up with a protocol for evacuation on a school bus as a result of a fire. The question also arose in regards to the fire. If the children are buckled in, who's going to unbuckle them? Will it be a longer amount of time to get them unbuckled? And my response to that is that buses just don't catch on fire. Okay? And what I said in continuation to that is that there is an impact that causes these fires. Doing my due diligence looking at that, I said the impact is going to jostle these children and probably injure them, and they'll be in a panic. So does it make more sense to try to evacuate a fire-filled bus with children in panic, in injury, or a child that is buckled in safely, prevented from those type of injuries as a result of an impact? So the answers to the questions are there within the packet. I feel very strongly about this legislation. Excuse me. As a parent, I submitted this legislation, and I hope to have your support.
Thank you very much, Representative Nautilillo. Obviously, very passionate about this. And as most of us who are parents know, when even as someone as old as me that has kids in their 20s, that when the children are young, they get into the car and immediately put the seatbelt on. They monitor each other. They're very aware of that. So, it's an issue that we've had in this building for 2 decades. And certainly new school buses, I'm surprised that they don't come with seat belts. But that being said, I'm also very impressed with the fact that, very often on the other side of the aisle, people get criticized for any expense at all. For you putting yourself out there and saying, I stand up, it's an added expense, but it's well worth it. So I give you a lot of credit for that. A good example for the rest of your delegation, someone to be admired for going forward with that. Are there any questions for Representative Natalillo? Representative Price.
Thank you, Chairman. Good legislation, Representative Natalillo. The question I have is, other states or other communities, who else requires seatbelts?
At this point in time, there are actually 6 states that have mandated seatbelts in school buses: California, Florida, Louisiana, New Jersey, New York, and Texas. And there are currently other states that are submitting similar legislation to mine. As a result of last year, the National Highway and Traffic Safety Administration really didn't take a strong stance on giving their opinion on how they felt about having seatbelts in school buses. And the administrator, the national administrator, Mark Rosekind, specifically came back this year and said seatbelts belong in school buses. And other states are following the initiative taken by the 6 other states in doing this mandate, because the national director of highway traffic and safety is taking a stance on this. And this is the person who knows the knowledge of what's going on our highways. And I feel, as I said, I feel very strongly about this, and it just makes sense.
Are there any further questions? Representative Fogarty.
Well, I think everybody supported the bill last year with the seatbelts. My question is, that you've talked to the bus drivers and you talked to parents. Did you talk to the superintendent of school about how they would fit this type of training in with, I know fire drills, they have a set amount. Is there any discussion with them?
I didn't have a conversation. This was something I more was going through the thought process of myself, because I said, I want to look at transportation. Of course, each school district within this bill would be able to come up with their own policy on how they want to handle that. But my opinion to that is to actually work with the bus companies to set up something that is more universal. It would make sense that way. How I feel about fire drills in schools is that it builds that confidence of evacuation. Okay, there's no panic. So I feel like that the school committee with the superintendent would be able to come up with policies and procedures, because something also that we didn't bring up, but I brought up last year is that who does the onus fall on when the child comes on the bus? It shouldn't really be the responsibility of the bus driver, other than the fact that when the child comes on the bus, to reiterate just as the parent would, buckle up. The child goes on the bus. The buckle is the same as it would be in the car. It's familiar. It's nothing that's uncomfortable for them. In setting up protocol for the child doing that, coming onto the bus, if the child does not do that, that they would have some sort of disciplinary reporting from the bus driver to the principal. And that was my thought process of, maybe a 3-strike policy. You're not wearing your belt again. You report it. And then maybe the child can't ride the bus until that policy is fulfilled with wearing the seatbelt. But the onus shouldn't fall, and this is why I spoke to the bus drivers. I said, your responsibility is to drive the bus. But it's you just reiterating what the parents said, put your seatbelt on. As soon as they come through the door, the bus driver is so kind and warm. Good morning, everything. Good morning. Don't forget to put your seatbelt on. And they go. You're talking seconds from coming from the car to the seat in the bus. It's familiar. It's there. And 80% of the parents, statistically nationwide, feel strongly about doing this. The other 20%, I would love to have a conversation with them and understand why. But I feel that they would feel strongly about this too, the school committees and superintendents. But I wouldn't want to step into their position and tell them how they would be able to set a policy of doing that. But I think it makes sense to have a fire drill on a school bus.
I would just like to see like their follow-up with it, because education is part of the school committee. Superintendent signed the contract for the school buses. And so the education portion of it would probably fall upon them, not really saying to the bus drivers. That's the only piece that I'm just kind of a little bit concerned for your legislation. I'm not saying I'm against it at all. I'm just saying I'd just like to see what the superintendent, or usually the gentleman's here and he's not here, but just their feedback on it, just because just to give a better perspective of it and just their thought process.
I think that's a great idea too, because as you said, it will fall on them to educate in that in terms of that. But I think coming up with a universal outlook of evacuation, it almost should happen now. It almost should happen now without seatbelts, and it's not there. So when there is a fire on a school bus, what actually happens? I mean, there's a door in the back and there's a door in the front. Is there set protocol and policy for evacuation now? As far as I know, there is not. So if anything, that this is going to bring light to that, but also it's an extra layer of safety that, as I said, it makes sense, and I do feel strongly about. As the chairman said, setting a mandate for something isn't something that I always feel strongly about, but this is something that I feel responsible as a parent first and a legislator second, bringing this to the table.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Representative Nuttall. And Representative McLaughlin would like to be listed as in the affirmative, and he is here. He had an important meeting earlier. With that, we have Joanna Skokie, who from the Advocacy for Children, who signed up in support of your legislation, and Mr. Andy Andrade from the Rhode Island Department of Education also is signed up in support of your legislation. And that concludes the hearing on 7155. Oh, and Rep. Lancia, how could I forget? Okay, he was here earlier. I forgot he came back. And with that, it concludes the hearing on House Bill 7155. And at this time, starting on my left, Representative McLaughlin, welcome. And we know that several of the representatives, you may see them occasionally coming in and out. That is due to the fact that we have more than one committee meeting at this time. And very often, they have to go to a committee, do a presentation on their bills, and then they will come in and out. So that's why we see that. On Representative McLaughlin's right, we have Representative Lancia, my colleague from Cranston. Welcome. And on his right, we have our Deputy Chair, Representative Diaz from Providence, capital city. My name is Joe McNamara, Chair of the committee. On my right, we have Representative Azanaro, all the way from Westerly. And luckily, he has his grandson, Ryan, to help him on that long ride, which seems to go on forever. I know I was ready to bring my passport the last time that I went out there. And on his right, we have Representative Marvin Abney of Newport and Middletown, the only guy that has to cross two bridges, Representative Abney, right? Two bridges on the way to the State House. And on the bottom row, starting on the left, we have my colleague from Cranston, Representative Handy, who is also the chair of the Environmental Committee. Thank you, Representative Handy. On Representative Handy's right, we have one of our first-term youthful representatives from the great city of Central Falls, Representative Maldonado, who is working on a lot of issues that affect not only our core cities, such as the libraries, but also the millennial housing, which is just a great advocacy, and thank you for that work. On her right, we have Representative Fogarty of South Kingston and a former chair of the South Kingston Town Council, Representative Fogarty. Thank you very much. Also a long drive. Representative Fogarty, how long, what's that take you, about a half an hour? Or 45 minutes? 45 minutes. And speaking of long drives, on her right, we have Representative Price from out in like Exeter, West Greenwich, and Richmond. Yes. Very good. The home of, is Camp Yago in your district?
It is. It is.
In Hope Valley? Rockville. That would be in Rockville. I spent my teenage years out there working on the staff. Beautiful country. Thank you for staying. And on his right, we have Representative Amore from East Providence, also a professional educator and former coach. And on Representative Amore's right, we have my colleague from Warwick, Representative David Bennett, RN, who is a nurse and offers his clinical expertise to our committee. We're very pleased to have them. And thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Motion to adjourn. The Rhode Island House of Representatives Committee on Health, Education, and Welfare is adjourned. Thank you and have a nice evening.